Aloha, beautiful beings, and welcome to another episode of the Yoni Havana podcast, where we explore consciousness, looking into how things work in the universe so we can enjoy life more and become more whole. My guest today is Embodiment Coach, Galactic Shaman, and Spiritual Ascension Trainer, Waxela Sananda. In this episode, Waxela explains why it's essential to ascend with our bodies, what is 5D and what does it feel like, what's Christ consciousness, what is the soul collective of Sananda, and much more. If you find value in this conversation, please share with someone you love. So enjoy this enlightening, mind-blowing conversation with Waxela Sananda. Oh, Waxela, thank you for coming on to the show. It's a blessing to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you, Yoni. I'm so excited to be here and share some time with you today.
Thank you. I'd like to start by talking first for you to tell the audience briefly about who you are and what you do, and then talk about embodied ascension. I'm enrolled in your training, Embodied Ascension, for a couple of years now, and it has been life-changing. So I'd like to start there.
Yeah, thank you. Who am I? Good question. So I can tell you about what I do. I'm Waxela Sananda. I am a galactic shaman. I channel, I work multidimensionally. I'm also, a regular person on a lot of levels. I'm a mom. I live a normal life and I have this very rich spiritual life and connection to the divine that I love to share. And so, galactic shamanism, the way that I practice that is I have been a contactee since I was a small child. I have had visitations from unusual beings, light beings, off planet beings, beings that looked really different than you and I growing up, starting from my earliest childhood memories. And in the beginning, that was a burden, but that became an asset as I learned to embrace it, learned to surrender, learned to allow myself to understand and go deeper into, okay, what is this? Why is this? And why me? And that opened me up to understanding life in a whole new way. And then that communication and ability to channel, light beings and the light became part of who I am. And so, when I would say who I am, that's hard to say, but that is really what I'm about. And embodied ascension is about raising your frequency in the body. And, we'll hear people talk about ascension a lot of times as getting out of body or, like getting so expanded that you're not even in touch with your body or leaving the body. Embodied ascension is coming into the body, bringing your divine presence, which is already in the body. But a lot of times we're scattered and fragmented all over the place out here. So bringing that in and raising the frequency of your embodiment, of your body, and expanding the ability to hold higher frequencies so that your ascension is your embodiment. You're bringing your body up with your mind, with your spirit, and expanding as a whole. And I guess in a nutshell, that's what embodied ascension is all about.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And when you talk about embodied ascension, and it's something that I've been working on, and as you're saying, it's about going inwards and through the heart portal. And I remember when I just started, I was asking a question just as a beginner to make sure, is this etheric heart? Is this a regular heart? Can you expand on how this is accessible? Because even just a few minutes ago, before the podcast, a friend of mine was texting me that he's getting into astral projections. And I was wondering also if to give him a word of caution of leaving the body. What's at play here?
Ooh, yeah. And I love talking about the heart. So, like everything in this reality, there are multiple dimensions to things. And so we have our physical heart, our beating heart that pumps the blood. That is the heart. Then we have our energetic heart, which is the heart chakra. A lot of people call it, that's the heart center, the heart chakra, the center of energy that is in our chest and around our chest. And then we get into, so that's kind of a level up. Think there's the very physical, and then there's the energetic, which is less physical, but still tangible. And then there's the multidimensional. Of course, there are a lot of levels in between all of these, but there's the multidimensional, which I call the infinitely faceted diamond light of the heart, the multidimensional heart, which is a portal of divinity, which is for me, I find this the place where the divine resides within the body. And it's not limited to the body because it is the divine. It is everywhere and everything. We can make contact with it through this interdimensional, it's a stargate portal of light within our heart center that we can access our divinity and the greater truth of who we are as beings, as light beings embodied. So that's the multidimensionality of the heart. It's kind of all of it. It helps if you want to access that to start with thinking about the beating of the heart, the physical heart. It's beating, it's bringing blood to my body. It's making my body alive. Without a beating heart, we can't live. And then to expand out energetically, how do I feel? What emotions are connected to it? That's the emotional body. The heart generates so much emotion. And then expanding out, the heart generates thought. It generates experience. It generates visual, and everything that we think of as the brain centric is also in the heart, and even more so. And so just to really give your heart credit, that center is a stargate portal for our divine existence. There
Beautiful.
was another part to that question. I lost
Yeah, I was
after I
asking.
started
Sorry,
talking.
I was asking two questions at once about the astral projections, and as you're saying, going
Mm, mm. Yes.
ascending from the portal of the heart versus going out of the body, for, I mean, perhaps
Yes.
even besides ascension. What's your take on it?
Yeah. Yeah. So I have been known to caution people about astral projection. Astral projection is essentially you're leaving your body, your spirit, if you want to call it that, your energetic body leaving your physical body to go play around in the astral planes. And if you are very well protected and anchored in your body, you feel, your body's anchored in the light, that can be okay. However, everything that's accessible out there is accessible in here through the diamond light of the heart, through the portal of the heart. We can also think of it as the crystalline. And when you learn to open that portal, you can travel within the heart center. We're really traveling within our multidimensional selves, which I personally find um, more relevant to what we're doing here than astral traveling, which is getting out. You just don't know what you might encounter because you're bumping up against a lot of things. There are different realms, layers, and realms where some of them are realms where we could be vulnerable to attack, essentially.
Mhm.
So that's why I say if you're going to astral project, make sure you're very well protected, that you're anchored, you know what you're doing, you have at least some training in spirituality, so you know how to protect yourself if, and I don't want to bring fear into anyone's experience, but things happen, right?
Mhm.
Everything is us, it's all us projected out. So it doesn't necessarily mean that anything, if something happens, you could confront a demon, whether you're going internal or external, you've got to have courage to face it one way or another if that's going to happen. And it's still you. It's that part of ourselves. It's us. It's all us. So it's that part of ourselves that wants attention, that wants something, that wants acknowledgement. Maybe it's hungry. Maybe it wants to eat you. Maybe it wants food, whatever, but it's still all us. It's just that when we do that from the inside, there's this richer, through the heart center, this richer foundation of love and anchoredness in divine truth that is soul protective. So that's how I do it and how I train my clients to do that.
What do you recommend for somebody who is doing astral projections and is facing a demon or a dark entity?
Yeah. So I've talked to people that are coming up against this before. First of all, I would I would really do before any astral projection experience to really get connected, deeply, deeply connected to your divine truth, to your heart, to yourself, and anchor your experience through your heart. If you go to sleep and you're really bringing that heart essence to the present before you go to sleep, before you astral travel, really getting in touch with your connection to the divine, or whatever that is for you, to your soul. If it's God, that's fine. God, whatever that is. If you don't have a connection to anything like that, that's going to be a lot harder. I don't know how to advise someone because that's very protective. It could be love. If you don't believe in anything like a source energy, it could be love or life itself. But to find that through the heart center and anchor in that before you go. And you can also practice traveling within. There are ways to activate that interdimensional portal of the heart. I have a number of meditations on my YouTube channel that are free that people could tune into that kind of talk about this. There are other teachers that talk about that. Of course, if you want to go deep, you can go to Embodied Ascension and take the course and really learn how to do that. But to at least be anchored in the heart before you travel, then when you confront that demon, knowing that it's yourself. And so, I've had to do this myself. I've had some scary things show up in my experiences, and oftentimes in my bedroom at night. And the way that I really remedied that fear, going into fear, was to learn to project love. If you practice, you can't just go from fear to love. That's, when we're in adrenaline and fear, it takes something to get out of that. So you want to start by practicing during the daytime, projecting love to everyone you see, to everything you see, a rock, a rabbit, a bird, a human, like everyone and everything, every situation. And when you practice that, and people who astral travel naturally, they know there are practices that you have to do. This could be one of them. When you project love to everything you see, then when you're confronted by something dark, what we think of as a demon, that you project love to, it'll usually do one of two things. It won't like if it's not of love, it won't like the feeling of being projected love. So it won't be able to hold the vibration of that. It won't be able to hang out in that frequency. So it will go away. Oftentimes it'll just run away, like just disappear quickly. Or if it is, if it's able to make contact with love within itself, maybe it's a part of you projected out that really craves love, and it receives that love that it craves, then it suddenly unfolds and becomes something beautiful.
Mhm.
And that can happen too.
Do you think in the latter instance, the dark or lower vibration entity actually wants and desires this type of healing from perhaps the being that has been astral projecting and the welcoming this type of healing?
Possibly. I mean, that would take, so there are all different levels, right, of beings. If it was a being that was on the verge of gaining greater consciousness, then absolutely it could target someone that it knows would help it get there, subconsciously. Like
Mm,
maybe it doesn't know, oh, I'm going to go, go after that. I'm going to go after Yoni because he's going to project love to me and I'm going to gonna
mm,
send to my next level. But
mm.
subconsciously, there's a greater, something greater involved that could put that together for you to learn to project love even to the things that show up as fearful or scary, or intimidating or whatever that is. And for that being to learn that love is possible.
It's
It's
beautiful.
kind of like Monsters Inc. Monsters Inc. That was a
Yes,
kid's show.
I do. I
I
watched that
love
movie.
that. That's really the lesson. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You mentioned briefly about what if that entity wants to eat you, and that triggered in my mind a story you told me. I think it was actually over a year ago at one of the retreats that we attended together, and I think it's from a Dr. Joe retreat that you've been with the alligator. Would you
Yeah.
mind telling that? So that's one of the most mind blowing stories I've ever heard in my life,
Right.
and also the experience
Mm.
that you mentioned, how you experienced in your body later on that day. So I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but if you don't mind telling kind of the whole experience there, that'll be
Yeah.
fantastic.
Oh, yeah, sure. This is fun. So this was one of my Dr. Joe. I've been to many Dr. Joe Dispenza advanced courses because I just love them and I get so much out of them. I had just moved to Florida, so it must have been about 6 years ago. And I was, it was an advanced course. So it was probably, 5 days, 7 days, however long we go. And it was it was like right away, maybe from the very first meditation. We go deep in those meditations. And, I had this fear of alligators because I had just moved to Florida. We had moved to a place where there was a water feature in front of our, home or behind our home. And there, even just driving through residential neighborhoods, sometimes you'll see an alligator. It happens, right? It's Florida. So I had a small son. My son was 8 years old, I think, at the time. And it just was a concern on my mind. Like, what if he's just walking and along and not looking where he's going and an alligator is there and eats him or me,
Mhm.
or any member of my family or, like it was on my mind. So I went in there with that, not on my conscious mind, but obviously my subconscious mind. So the first meditation um, I was confronted. Got to that space, and like out and just feeling so expanded and beautiful and wonderful. And then this alligator shows up in my meditation, and I'm like, "Whoa, what are you doing here?" And I noticed that fear start to come in, and I'm like, "Okay, I have a choice right now. I have a choice. I can let the fear take me out. I don't want to go out of this meditation. I want to stay right here. I can let the fear take me out, or I can confront it." And so I confronted it and I just said, what are you doing? What do you need?" And it didn't say anything, but it was clear that it wanted to eat me. And again, I'm like, okay, I have this choice flying. Do I let it eat me or do I go out? And I'm like, I'm just going to go with it. I'm going to lean into it. Okay, go ahead. Eat me. So it did. It ate me. And I didn't feel anything, but the next thing you know, I had turned into like matter and it was pooping me out in the pond that it was in. And I went down into the muck at the bottom of the pond. And then I started growing and growing up into the light, toward the light. And then I became this lotus flower at the top of the pond. And I got to feel the the feeling of my petals opening and receiving the sun and being held by the water, and the sun was like blissful, ecstatic energy and just this incredible feeling of opening to receive the sun. And that's what made me open, what caused me to expand and grow. And it was pure ecstasy. And it was so beautiful. And I was just like, wow, that was an amazing when we came out of that. I was so, I felt enlightened. It was incredible. And so that was my opening meditation at that retreat. And then every single meditation in that retreat, I was confronted by something that wanted to destroy me, eat me, blow me up, burn me, whatever. And I remember the final one was I found myself suspended. Reached wherever I was and found myself suspended in a cave. It was a cave of pink crystals. So, like, you think of a crystal point, and they were rose quartz, I guess, pink crystals all around me. I'm looking around like, wow, this is beautiful, but why am I stuck like this? I'm stuck suspended in the air. And I look around and like, oh, I'm on a spider web. This is a huge spider web, which means there's got to be a spider around here that wants to eat me, that put me in its web, right? And so at this point, I'd had so many of these experiences. I'm like, okay, where are you? And I kind of looked behind me and I could see out of my peripheral, it was behind me. And its fangs were rose quartz points, like crystal points.
Wow.
I'm like, hey, if you're gonna get me, this is gonna be awesome. Will you please get my lower back? I've been meditating all week and sitting, and I have some lower back pain. And I know this is gonna be amazing. And I'm like looking forward to the spider biting me now. I'm just like, yeah, let's go. And then it was at that very moment where the spider was about to put its fangs in my back that Dr. Joe said, okay, come on back. And I'm like, oh, shoot. So at that point, I had gotten to the point of so deep, like surrendering so much in my meditations that I'm like, come on, let's go. This is going to be good. Like, it's always good. It's always good. And I was looking forward to it by the end. So that was wonderful training for what to do when a demon or something scary shows up. Just love it and have the transformation that it's offering, whatever that might be.
These experiences are absolutely mind blowing. And I think that people are listening to it and including myself, when I listen to this experience, I'm like, I'd love to have this experience. How much work do you think one would have to do to get to the experience and also to be able to surrender to an experience of that kind?
Ooh, that's, that is a multifaceted question because everybody's unique. It what it takes, I mean, there are just a few key things that I talk about a lot. Curiosity, tenacity, and then ultimately surrender. So to be curious about what you are confronted with, that's a key ingredient. Like, what is this? Oh, it's an alligator. What does it want? Or it's a demon. It's a spider. It's a whatever you're afraid of. It's what does it need from me? Because we know it's part of ourselves. And then to keep going, like how much time, that's so individual. Just to keep practicing and practicing, going deeper. I think a lot of times when people can't, they're like, "Oh, I can't meditate, I can't get deep." Maybe it's just that you haven't allowed yourself to. You haven't surrendered to yourself. You haven't surrendered to, oh, I feel back pain or my mind's racing or all of those things. Those are the layers we get to work through in order to get to go deep and to just let it be okay in the beginning. I still have mind chatter sometimes when I start my meditation. I think that's normal. I can drop in pretty quickly and easily now. I've been practicing for 30 years plus. But how fast you can get there is really about how much surrender you have. How much can you surrender to your experience? Like, a lot of times when my nose is itching or my, whatever, things will just get your attention, right? Whatever it is. Like, can I just let that be what it is? It's a sensation I'm feeling. Okay. It's back pain. Okay. I allow that. I surrender to that. And sometimes if something's really bothering me, like I go for acupuncture and I mean, I had needles all over my hands, she puts them everywhere. So I might have 10 needles in each hand. If my nose itches or my eye, I'm not going to move my hand. I'm not going to like do this. Who knows what might happen, right?
Right.
So I get to practice what I do. Sometimes it seems unbearable, but I magnify that feeling. Okay, it's really, 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 really uncomfortable. Okay, so it's really uncomfortable. What's uncomfortable? It's a sensation. It's my brain interpreting a sensation as uncomfortable. That's not even a real thing. That's just an idea that I have about something. So it's a sensation. And this is how I did childbirth too. I did both my children natural childbirth at home in a pool of water, never went to a hospital. Because that pain, yeah, there's pain, but it's a sensation that I'm going to surrender to and allow so that I can have a relationship with it. And I think that's the key ingredient. Can you have a relationship with your experience, with what you're experiencing, and not let it take you out? That nose itch, that back pain, that demon, that mind chatter, whatever it is, the alligator wants, it's trying to take you out. It's just a challenge you've set up for yourself, right? So when I let myself surrender to it, let's just like lean in. Okay, alligator, go ahead. You want to eat me? Have at it. Look at the transformation that's possible. And the same thing happens every time for me when I surrender to it. I let it be. If I can't get rid of the mind chatter, like I'll go to what's the absolute worst thing that could happen if I think about this right now, or like I let this thought take me. Okay. Then I put it aside. I think things must be acknowledged. So if we just try to pretend it's not there or distract
Mm.
ourselves from the distraction, we're just going to get sucked in deeper, right? But to lean into it, surrender to it. Okay, if this really wants my attention right now, I'll take a piece of paper and write it down. I will remember to do these things, right? And then set it aside. And then, okay, now I can be present. It's all about getting present, whatever it takes to get surrendered to the presence, whatever's present with you at that moment.
Mm.
Nose itch, back pain, alligator.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think one of the most unique things that about you that attracted me to do work with you, immediately when I met you, is that you live very much of a third dimensional life as a mother, as a business owner, as just a fellow human, and you have all these access and all these experiences and all this wisdom and light within you. And if you don't mind, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your life path, including the training that you went through in your 20s, what did that look like? What, I mean, what did wa-shay-la come in and were contacted, as I said, at a young age by multidimensional entities, and since then she's been, you know, just a shamanista. I'd love for you to share how you've been embodying and enjoying this third dimensional life, working with the challenges that it has, and also working with all this multidimensional aspects of your
Mm.
life.
Yeah. Yeah. It really comes to ways of being. And I am very driven as a business person. I value all the same things that other people do, parenting and family and friends. And, I do all the things that everybody else does and run my business. And I used to get really overwhelmed. I used to get really overwhelmed with my to-do list and all the things that, and overwhelm is just something that would take me out of presence, right? And then at some point, I did get a lot of training, but at some point, I'm like, I'm just going to embrace all of it. Like that uncomfortable feeling. Overwhelm is uncomfortable, right? Again, I'm going to surrender the overwhelm is like, it's the idea that I can't, or that I'm not enough somehow, or that the stuff that I've created for me to do is bigger than me, my ability to do it, which is, not true. I created all those things to do, right? Wouldn't really have to do any of them. Um, so it's a way of being and that, again, like surrendering to the present moment. I'm not always a master at this. I have my moments where I get taken out like anybody else, but surrendering to what shows up in that moment. And so as far as my life path, I mean, as a child, I would get visited by entities in my room at night, usually. And I would get really, 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 really scared. I would get freaked out. I didn't like it. I would hide. I'd try and hide under my covers. They found me anyway. I would go in my parents' room and take a sleeping bag and sleep at the end of their bed because I thought, well, the entity experiences rarely ever happened there. I did all kinds of things to try and stop what I was experiencing because it scared me. And at some point in my life, I don't even know I do know when it was. It was when I was a foreign exchange student in Merida, Mexico. I was 17 years old and I went to the Mayan ruins. And when I was at the Mayan ruins, I didn't know because I grew up in rural Iowa. There was no metaphysical anything going on there. Grew up Lutheran, didn't know about the world of energy. I knew I was experiencing stuff that nobody else was around
Mhm.
me, but I didn't know anything about it, how to handle it, how to manage it, how to control it, none of that. So I went to Merida and went to the Mayan ruins, Chichen Itza, Uxmal, Tulum, Liltun, all of the beautiful Mayan ruins down there. And I started picking up energy and memories started coming in. Like, I remember being here. I remember how we did this. I started remembering, which was weird for me. I'm like, who, how, what, like I didn't even really have a concept of reincarnation or anything like that yet. I hadn't woken up in that way yet, but that experience showed me that there was more to who I am than the person that I thought I was. And memories started dropping in. I suppose parts of self started dropping in as they can at sacred sites. When we go to sacred sites, we can pick up pieces of ourself, fragments, soul fragments that we've left there for ourselves to find. And it's not an accident that I ended up going to Mayan ruins as on my foreign exchange year because it was so expanding for me. And then I came back and I found the movie Out on a Limb with Shirley MacLaine. And she talks about meeting Pleiadians and channeling and all these things I didn't know about before. I was like, I started having more memories. And I'm telling you, when I watched that, and I was just a teenager, my whole body was vibrating. I was watching it and I was like I mean, it was crazy. I'm like, what is happening to my body? And so I went out and she talked about Edgar Casey. She talked about Pleiadians. That's when I really started reading and consuming information. I read everything I could find that Edgar Casey wrote my freshman year of college. I was always in the metaphysical section of my library. And that was so exciting to me to learn, okay, other people are having these experiences, and starting to put together some of what I had experienced growing up that nobody could explain and that I wouldn't even talk about at that point. So that was instrumental for me in my waking up. Then it was like metaphysical books, and I started practicing and meditating and practicing. I knew that I could fly. I knew that I had some of these superpowers that I didn't, I started to learn how to work with them, extrasensory abilities, and, like learned how to hone, like self training, some of these things, these skills, learned to use my psychic abilities. All this started to activate in me. And then going forward, I moved to Dallas, Texas out of college, met up with a shaman who I had designed my life to go to Kauai for 3 months. I thought it was going to be 3 months. And it's a long story, so I'll just make it really short. I encountered a shaman who I sat down and had a conversation with, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to Kauai and I want you to come with me." And I said, "Perfect. I've already planned my trip, already designed my life to be able to go for 3 months." And then I ended up training with him and his mentor for the next 3 years in Hawaii.
May I ask a few context questions
Please.
before we move
Yes,
on?
please.
So, why you're having these experiences as a child? Did you share any of these experiences with anybody?
I did not, because that after the very first time I remember being visited was really intense. I was put in a cocoon type of energetic container, and it was just such an intense feeling. I didn't know what had gone on, but when that energy went out of my room, I heard in my mind, "Don't tell the adults; they won't understand." And so I did not talk about my experiences. That stuck with me. They won't understand, and it was such a strong, like, there was something about it, like, I knew that it was very, very important not to tell the adults because they wouldn't understand. I didn't talk about it until I was an adult, and I'm like, "Wait, I'm an adult now. I better start sharing."
How old
Yeah.
were you when you had the cocoon experience with that message?
Somewhere, like, around 3 years old.
3 years
Very
old. Wow,
young. Yeah,
super young.
very young.
And during college, when you so you went on the foreign exchange, you have this activation happening in the Mayan temples, ruins. Did
Mhm.
you share with anybody then?
I don't think I understood what was going on, so I might have talked about it with some of my friends, but nobody had any feedback for me other than like, "Yeah, you're just different, wa-shay-la."
Yeah. And during college, when you're learning about metaphysical and self learning about all this stuff, is there anybody that you share this, explore this with, or all of this is so far a lone journey? Uh,
Alone, pretty much alone. Yeah, even in college, I didn't have any like-minded people, to talk about these things with.
and what were you studying on paper besides all the other research you were doing on your own?
In college, you mean?
Yes, yes.
Art. I was an art student, visual studies design,
Mm,
with an emphasis in photography and painting. And then I also had emphasis in psychology and sociology. I really wanted to be an
mm,
art therapist, and I thought I would go that direction. Then when I realized I'd have to work in either a hospital or clinical
mm.
environment, I let that go because I knew I needed to be, that wouldn't work for me energetically.
So do you run like a parallel life in that point where you're curious about all these
Yeah.
metaphysical things, but also you have friends and you go to classes and all that? Do you drink alcohol at that point?
Oh, yeah.
What's your
Yeah, yeah,
yeah?
I did.
Okay. Just a little, yeah. I mean, curiosity here on my end, and I'm sure from the audience, like, what was your life like
Yeah,
coming
I
into?
mean, from the outside looking in, I was very studious. I loved studying and learning. So I got straight A's in all my classes. I went out
Right.
and partied and had a lot of fun. I had friends. I did all the college stuff that kids do. And on the side, I'm
Mm,
consuming as much metaphysical material as I can, like reading voraciously. I could read so many books so fast at that time. I mean,
mm,
I just consumed as much as I could, and I was just like a sponge for all of it. Yeah.
beautiful. And what were you planning to do in Kauai before the change of plans with the shaman?
I was running a store. I went right into retail. So I had 3 retail stores. One of them, I was living in Dallas, Texas at the time. I had set my store up to be able to go because this is the synchronicities. And I was really tuning into my psychic abilities and things. That synchronicities were speaking to me. And I had been in my store and I'd heard people talking about Kauai. And it was kind of like a ding, like pay attention. Oh, Kauai. Okay. And then this is pretty cool. Another day, I went out for lunch, locked my door of my store, came back from lunch. There is a book about Kauai on my desk. How'd that get there? I don't know. A couple days later, I had 2 roommates. So I go home from work and my roommates had left a magazine on the kitchen table opened up to the Nepali Coast Trail in Kauai, with a little note, read this. You might find this interesting. Like, oh, and I hadn't told them, about the Kauai thing. So it was coming from every direction. It was like, "All right, got it." And I would say if I get 3 synchronicities on a topic like Kauai, I'm gonna go there. So
Mhm.
it happened multiple times. I decided to design my life to be away for 3 months. And then these messages started coming from friends like, "Hey, there's this shaman in town. You really need to meet him. Something's going on." And
Mhm.
so I had set myself up to go. And it was all exactly as it was meant to be when I met the shaman, and who was a walk-in, by the way, is a walk-in shaman. So he had been a galactic that walked into the body of a man who was basically either ready to cross over or in need of some healing. And he came and found me and trained me in a way that no other shaman, and that's why galactic shamanism, because he wasn't trained the traditional earth way. He came straight in from if you want to call it the stars, from consciousness.
Yeah, I'd like to go over the definition. So, galactic shamanism, from what I know about shamanism, it has to do with the classical elements of the earth. What does galactic shamanism mean?
Yeah, so that's all part of it. Really, for me, it's funny because when I got the label, the term galactic shaman, it came from I asked my guidance, what should I call myself? What's the right thing to call myself? Because shaman feels to me like you've been trained in um, a native way that, and I have certainly do have some of that training. I trained with a kahuna in Kauai, and the shaman that walked in did have a lot of that earth, native essence as well. However, I heard Galactic Shaman and it all made sense because of it's about that lineage. So when he came in, when that consciousness came in and trained me, he was really activating my soul memories and my
Hmm.
abilities to make contact, conscious contact with basically the various star races that I've come from in the stars. It's not just the races and the beings, but the stars themselves and the galactic bodies and the consciousness that exists that like we all come from a collective consciousness, like a big container consciousness, right? And so it's about making contact with aspects or elements of that collective and being able to bring through messages from them and to be able to, activate myself and others through those connections. That is, for me, that's the galactic why it's galactic shamanism, not if you want to say earth shamanism. It's still there's a reverence for the earth and the elements and all of the world of the unseen. There's just this galactic essence to it that is part of, if you want to call it earth shamanism, but not but it's greater. It's more the focus in
Hmm.
galactic shamanism.
Very cool. Um, the other question that came to mind is, so you're reading all this stuff in college, about Palladians and such. Do you then identify with being from a specific star? What's your what are your realizations about your energy spirit source um,
Yeah,
at
yeah.
the time?
Okay, so this like everything else, this has evolved over time.
Hmm.
Um, I started out understanding like very, very clearly. I heard Sirius. whenever, a very long time ago, somebody said Sirius, and it was just this soul recognition. I heard Sirius B. And I didn't even know at the time there was a Sirius B, but there is. There's a place called Sirius B. So what I know now, I thought, oh, that's where I'm from. But it's not that that's the only place that I'm from. We're this galactic melting pot, if you will, where there's so many different star races and beings that have contributed to us. And so I resonated with that Sirius B because it's a water world. I've had a lot of life and I have memories of being mer person, mer people. That swim in the water, live in the water. I was also light codes in the water in Sirius B for eons of time, where I call it a light courier. I would take information or receive information. Our structures there were conscious and could hold energy, crystalline structures. I would go in, pick up the information that was needed, and then go deliver it throughout the water, the oceans, to wherever it was needed, whether it was a sea turtle or dolphin or a whale or another castle, crystal castle, something like, take these information codes, these source codes or encoded information in light and deliver it where it needed to go. This was also a form of raising frequency. These are frequency codes. So they would uplift and give energy and bring, basically ascend the frequency of whoever was receiving them. And so that was my job. I wasn't even physical. I was light for a long time in Sirius. And then I remembered that first, or those different experiences, whales and dolphins and being all the sea creatures there. And then I started to have memories of other lifetimes. I saw myself as Lyran and Arcturian and Pleiadian. And then there are so many races that we don't even know the names of. We don't even, like there's a whole lot of stars out there that we haven't, as humanity, haven't discovered and don't know what they're even called. And of course, we all have connections to much more than the ones that we are familiar with as well.
Mhm.
And a lot of them, yeah, wouldn't even be able to, they're frequency based. So I wouldn't be able to say the word in English because it doesn't have that kind of language to it. It's a frequency. But when you learn to match frequency, to hold a frequency and then find the match to that, which we learn in Dr. Joe Dispenza as well, you can really make contact with presences from all over the universe, if you want to view it that way. It's about the
Mhm.
frequency. You'll find your frequency matches and then you'll remember more of yourself.
Mhm. So a lot of evolutions, a lot of different places, a lot of experiences come in to just evolving into the next phase. And that's why there's not necessarily one origin. Do you have a memory perhaps of first incarnation, however that is pronounced?
I do. I do.
Oh, wow.
I do. I remember my first incarnation. Um, I actually, this is just a wild story, another wild synchronistic story, but it's more meaningful to me, I think, than anyone else. I was a seahorse. It sounds really strange, but if you think about a seahorse, it's such a delicate little being, and I wanted to have a minimal experience of physicality. And so I actually was getting trained. So this has happened a couple times where I've remembered, not just remembered, I have become conscious in my consciousness, became a seahorse again. So I
Mhm.
remember like fully, viscerally
Wow.
being the seahorse. And it happened in a Dr. Joe Dispenza meditation. I really was a seahorse and my consciousness fully morphed into that. Then another time when I was in I was getting hypnosis training. I was training in what's it called? Integrative hypnosis with Antonio
Mhm.
Sangio. He was hypnotizing someone at the front of the room, a volunteer, and he saw something that I didn't even see. He pointed at me. He said, "You're going next." He didn't say it out loud. He mouthed, "You're going next." And I felt it. I was feeling, and at that point, I'm like, "Oh, I dropped in and he then brought me up to the front because I went into a hypnotic trance. And where I went, I couldn't describe it because I was a seahorse in these, I remember the grass, it was this just beautiful, soft green seagrass. And I had my tail wrapped around it. And it was my first experience of incarnation from
Wow.
light. And it's natural that I would choose a sea creature because I had been light for so long. I had just
Mm,
been light. I hadn't been a physical being. So the first experience of being was this little seahorse, and it was so delicate. And I felt so fragile and so vulnerable and terrified to be embodied because my consciousness felt trapped and it was
mhm.
very insecure feeling. And I was excited to get out of that experience. That was my first brush in with being physical.
Wow. Do sea creatures such as seahorses, do they vibrate on a high frequency compared to most humans? Lower, around the same? What's your take on it?
So it's interesting because, and I'm just getting this in real time here, like humans, sea creatures, animals can essentially channel and embody various levels of consciousness. So, anybody that's had a number of pets throughout your lifetime, I'm a cat person. I've had many different cats throughout my life. I had one cat who told me he was coming before he came. His name was Osiris. He told me that. Saw him in a vision 3 months before he showed up in my life. And wow, that was a conscious cat. I mean, I had full telepathic communication with him. He was a a very conscious spiritual being in a cat body. He just came to be with me for a while. It was amazing. I loved him. I miss him. So there are different levels. There are also cats. I mean, I've had cats that just didn't have that. They just didn't have that at all. They're just cats. And so within the spectrum of animals, same with sea creatures. I mean, certainly dolphins and whales are extremely conscious. There are, seahorses, they don't have such a high level of consciousness. They're,
Mm,
the fish and things are more just being fish and food so they're just these very, but that doesn't mean that they can't have a higher consciousness come through them and be messengers. And that's another thing. Animals are open so they can channel consciousnesses. So it's not uncommon for someone, let's say, who has lost a beloved pet to, see an animal that represents their pet out in the world, and the consciousness can come through, or a higher consciousness can come through and remind them, I'm still with you. I'm just not in a body now.
it reminds me, we had a dog, meaning my wife and I. When I just met her, she had a dog, and she found him on the streets of Atlanta. She was living in Atlanta at the time. And when I met her in San Francisco, kind of took over. I always wanted a dog. My family did not want a dog, and really connected with the dog. Tiny little dog, like 5.5 pounds, super sweet. And we connected. And when he passed away, we were devastated, and we did not want to get a dog for a while. We didn't want. I'm like, kind of, I don't know, just grieving. And years later, we looked at a few fostering and adopting and all that, and my wife has filled many applications, and eventually we got a dog. We now have a puppy. And when we got the puppy, because we were together right before I picked up the puppy, and we were looking at one dog because we did not want the same dog that we had, but we wanted the same breed, a schnauzer. So I said, okay, let's have the same breed but also a mix. So we got a schnoodle, a schnauzer poodle, and we go to pick up the dog. And not only this dog, we ended up going with the dog that looks more similar to the dog we had. As soon as I see the dog, I'm like, that's him. That's him. He
Mm.
just rejoined the family. This is about 4 years later, and have not been so far one to have such strong messages of communication with the greater divine. I've had some experiences, but not definitely not as clear as wa-shay-la and as many as wa-shay-la has had, for the listeners out there. And it was as clear as day. I'm like, okay, well, here you go, welcome back. And now we have this relationship in a little bit of a different way, but it's still the same relationship. And I'm so grateful that that being came back to be with us. And it's
Mhm.
absolutely amazing. Uh, yeah, I just wanted to share that. And I wanted to touch in, you mentioned a walk-in earlier about the shaman training that you had in Hawaii. And also what it sounds like is that a cat can have a walk-in from perhaps a higher spirit. What is a walk-in for the ones that are not familiar with that term? And what also was your experience with a walk-in in Hawaii on that end?
Okay, yeah, this is a big question. So walk-ins can come in many forms, in many ways. Essentially, a walk-in in this context is someone who a consciousness, a being that comes in to a body, not as an infant being born, but comes into a preformed body. And this can be of someone who's leaving the planet. So sometimes, and in this case, there's always a deal made. They walk-ins don't just take a body over without permission and without making a deal. And there are spiritual benefits for those. Okay, so an evolved human body that has been gone through its childhood, is now an adult, is a very hot commodity for a spirit who has a message or a job here, who wants to come in and not have to go through all that baby childhood stuff, right?
Mhm.
They want to come in to a fully grown body and have sovereignty and then be able to do their work. They must, if they're going to fully take over, they must finish the karma, complete the karma and finish the work of the one that they're taking over, and then they can do their work. Or in the experience that I had, it was a temporary walk-in. Of course, I didn't know any of this when I met him. I was like, this is just the person that I met. And I had no idea that it was temporary. It was actually about 3 years. He had the original owner of the body had overdosed, had a drug overdose. He's even talked about he remembers crossing over. He remembers talking to a council, and then he was in a holding space. But time was different there, so it wasn't like it felt like 3 years to him. It just felt like he was in a holding space and then he came back at some point, but he didn't remember the interim. So in that interim, the walk-in that was I call it my twin flame walk-in because he was the essence of myself embodied in a male body, but at a higher level of consciousness, particularly at that time. He came in, he found me, he trained me. And then 3 years down the road, the body was recovered enough. And I didn't know at the time that was the deal that was made. When the body was recovered enough for the original to be fully back, then the exchange would be made. And it wasn't an instant, but it was noticeable. The change was very noticeable to me. And I think to him as well. But anyway, so there was an exchange and that spirit went out of the body and the original came back in and we parted ways because there was no compatibility there at that point. So that's another style. There is also a type of walk-in that's very temporary, very momentary, which is, for instance, this is a great, for instance, when I was a kid, I used to go on trips with my mom. We would go visit her family about 3.5 hours away, but in the car. And it was a very peaceful Iowa cornfields. We're just, it was like kind of a hypnotic trance being in those spaces. Well, she and I would have the most amazing conversations. I can remember being 9 or 10 years old, and my mom is talking to me about what if this is all a great experiment and there are actually beings watching us. And, we talked about karma and manifestation, all these amazing things that really set my mind up to think a certain way. And I've asked my mom about that since. And she's like, I don't remember having conversations like that. Well, now I understand that was my guidance coming in and having conversations with me as a child to help me set me up for what I would be doing. It was through my mom. So I just thought I was having cool conversations with my mom.
Wow.
And
So
that's a temporary walk in.
so the soul uh that usually inhabits that body, where does that soul go during a walk-in to the point that they cannot remember or witness, let's say, those experiences? What happens then? Do you know?
Yeah. So, well, I do know. And you have to remember or understand that when we're out of body, time is part of being in gravity and body. In this reality we experience, 3 years seems significant, right? But when we're not bound and we're not physical, you can go, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. It doesn't pass the same way. So where he went is it's basically because I got to see all of this. I asked my guidance to show me what happened, and I got to see the
Mhm.
whole thing from a higher perspective. And so it was basically like being held in the light, almost like light cryotherapy. Not frozen, but I saw him in a room of light where his body was being worked on and repaired and held while the walk-in was using his physical body.
Mhm.
So this his the original's emotional body was damaged.
I see.
His spiritual body, his emotional body, he did some damage. And so he there was repair being happening. And it was kind of like a resting space. He went into almost like, if you think of our human essence as electronic, it's almost like the consciousness was shut off for him. Like he wasn't really necessarily conscious of being there, or, didn't feel like a long time to him. He just went to a nice holding space. And then when the time was right, he came back and reintegrated. And
Mm.
so there are these spaces that are beyond time and beyond the physical where people can go into sort of a holding pattern. I think people in comas oftentimes will go into these spaces of being held until the time is right for them to come back or leave.
When you talk about electronic, it reminds me of something that I mentioned to this day that I read in your book a couple years ago. And that's that and tell me if I'm butchering it. You described us as walking USBs with the ability to connect to the database, to this all encompassing consciousness to get those downloads. And it was, as somebody who has background in tech, this was very much speaking to me, especially as I was growing more and more into the spiritual world. But from my understanding, it's not only that the USB is the physical body, the USB can be the emotional body. How do you explain that analogy?
Yeah, so I'll tell you how I got that. I was in Mexico a couple years ago. I was doing Lucia Light sessions for I was on actually a tour going across Mexico and then all across the US and then landing in Hawaii. And I was I remember being staying in a room, and I had this experience with Archangel Michael where I would call in Archangel Michael to do cord cuttings, which you've learned about in Embodied Ascension. That's one of the trainings. And Archangel Michael, and he has a blue light sword where he can help us cut cords. And so I did a cord cutting. I called him in, and he said, "You don't need my sword. You have your own sword. It's time for you to start using your own sword." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So he handed me my sword, and it was actually I looked at it more closely and I'm like, looks like a USB port. It was like a flash drive, except, longer and little
Mhm.
different shaped. But I'm like, this is like a flash drive. What do I do with this? And he said, and that's what he taught me. It was Archangel Michael taught me how to plug into things. He actually said, go into like walk over to the bathroom. And in the bathroom, I had these little jars like makeup, they're, like face cream or whatever. He's like, anything can be programmed with code. You can program, and he was like showing me, like, you can program this plain lotion to do what this superpower eye cream does, or you can program your water to do that, or you can, he's like, this is all code. This whole reality is code. So learn to plug into the code and do your own coding. You can upload source codes and frequencies and receive them, and you can download them to other things. So you can it's a type of channeling essentially. But when he was showing it to me through the world of coding, and I'm not even a tech person at all. Like this was all just like, oh, this is interesting. Upload, download. Just he's like, so when you want to cut cords with someone, you just use your sword, but you're not cutting. You're plugging into a different reality where those chords, where that it's really frequency, that frequency dynamic has already transformed. You're
Mhm.
changing your coding of your reality in doing this, right? So it's
Mhm.
less physical. A sword cutting is very physical. And humans, think about when cord cutting became a thing. Well, we've had swords since the beginning of human existence probably. And so it's easy to conceptualize that. But as we evolve, that's kind of archaic and brutal. Like swords are for cutting and it's stabbing, right? So why not evolve that into something?
Mm.
Let's encode a reality that is more to more of a frequency match to where we choose to be. Now that we've recognized that this interaction or these chords with this person are not uplifting and for the highest good of all involved. And so you just recode. And then that becomes recoding the human operating system. And we get into that too in the course.
That actually really helps me have a better understanding of this process and the cord cutting process. It relates to what I've learned from Dr. Joe about the infinite possibilities. So all of them happening at the same time. And it's about tuning in into pretty much a parallel life with
Yeah.
a little bit of a different flavor. Uh, now it makes even more sense. I know for myself and perhaps for other people, it takes a lot of times for me to internalize and have a deeper and deeper understanding of something. So that was big for me. I do want to talk about Dr. Joe for a second. How many retreats of Dr. Joe Dispenza have you been to?
I have been to, I've either done 13 or 14 now. I actually think it's 13 advanced courses and, of course, the progressive. So I've been to a few.
What is drawing you back to those retreats? Also, knowing of how much prior work and how much access you already have on your own to have all these experiences.
Oh, great question. And I know the first time, the very first one I went to, I sat with, you know, how you share with the person next to you. I sat with a woman and she said, "Oh, this is my fourth advanced course." And I looked at her and I'm like, "Did you not get it the first three times?" Like,
Yeah.
right. That was as a newbie, my newbie thinking. Now I know that you go back, not because you didn't get it the first time, but for one, there's always another level to get to. Every time I go back, something new unfolds. Plus, he brings new information in. But even if it's the same information from the last time, and as we evolve, we're able to receive and upgrade. We always receive at the level we're at. That's why we can read a book in our 20s and then read that same book when we're, 20, 30 years later and get something so much bigger out of it. Same with watching a movie. We receive things where we are. So every time I go, I'm in a new place. I'm going to receive that information differently. That's one reason. Also, there's nothing like meditating with 1,500 people at the same time. There's this really unique experience of that collective consciousness all raising together. And it's really a special experience. And then also for me, the extraction from my daily life, from my house and laundry and taking care of people and things, to be able to remove myself from that and go to a place where it's just consciousness and exploring and friends and meditation and breath work, that is golden. So there's something about getting away from my normal daily routine that allows me to really reach some profound access.
Beautiful. I had a similar experience with the first retreat. I came back and I said, okay, I'm only going to go to the advanced follow up from now on because I feel like I really embodied the information. Also turn around to strangers next to me and I felt like I had a good understanding or understanding of the information of the teachings of how things work. And then I'm like, after a little while, and my wife, who now works for Dr. Joe, went to advanced follow up. And she said she didn't have as much actually fun because, first of all, it was shorter. Those were 3.5 days versus 7. And then she said, actually, like, I like to take it easy and then absorb more and more. And then the last time we talked about it, before she even started working for him, I said, you know what, I actually want to go to another one, another 7-day retreat. And also had the realization, perhaps I was a bit arrogant with myself, that I embodied all the information. I'm ready to move on. There's a part of me, and I think a part of a lot of people, that wants to move fast and accelerate and like, oh, give me the next thing and the next thing, kind of a little bit in a linear fashion, or even in a non-linear fashion, but only to move up without having to revisit or perhaps relearn some things from the past. But I do have a much greater appreciation to relearning things and looking at them, as you said, with a new perspective and a new frequency. So that has been my experience. I want to touch on a little something, and let's go on a personal level. So you talked about the walk-in shaman in Hawaii. What was this? Just to remind me, was this a romantic relationship too, besides the training?
Yeah. Yeah, it did become it didn't start out that way. It started out as friendship, but along the journey, we actually we fell in love. He is I don't yeah, I guess I can say that. He's the father of my daughter. And that all happened very quickly. Now in retrospect, I know it was supposed to be that way, of course, you know. But so yeah, there was a romantic element to that relationship. Yes.
Um, as you said, it was your twin flame. So are you at the time in a romantic relationship with your twin? What is
What's
that
a twin
experience? Yeah.
you asking like what
Yeah, and
like
a twin
to
flame, like it's with your twin, like another mirror
yeah.
of your soul.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So the concept of twin flame is that I mean, I'm not going to say this is right or wrong. This is elementary. I'm going to give it in a kind of a simple way. So the idea is that your soul splits into two, and there's a feminine and a masculine side of it, essentially. We're all of that, you know, we're all masculine and feminine, but there's a more feminine expression and a more masculine expression. And with the intention of going out in the great big universe and collecting information and data, and then at some point coming back together and sharing what we've learned. Usually, when a soul does that, it does not meet itself again in the physical, because in some ways you're limiting your experience by we're both going to go have the same experience when we could go have completely different experiences and get more expansion, right? Because the soul
Mhm.
wants to expand. And in some cases, twin flames will choose to have an incarnation together in the physical in the same place, meet up, and then what happens is they reflect a lot of they reflect their souls to each other. So it's called twin flame ascension. I didn't even know that was a thing back then.
Wow.
But twin flame ascension is when you meet your twin flame, you come together, and then you expand very rapidly together. You expand each other and you gain in consciousness. And sometimes that relationship is able to last. Quite often it's not, because it's such an intense experience of being together with your other half, that a lot of times they need to go separate ways and live different lives. But when they do come together and have that expansion, it's twin flame ascension. It's very powerful. And what I know now is that a twin flame walk-in is not bound to one body. He's actually come through in shorter time periods through a number of bodies,
Mhm.
and has potential to come again.
Is the twin flame? Do you know if if your twin flame at the moment is on Earth or is not?
Not embodied right now.
Do you have communication with your twin flame at the
Yes.
moment?
Yeah, yeah. He can actually come. This is weird. I'm gonna get really weird for a minute. If none of the other stuff
Please,
was weird.
please go ahead. By all means.
So this is it's a little bit out there, but just bear with me here. So he groomed 12 bodies, meaning prepared them frequency wise. I affectionately call him the body snatcher sometimes, because you know, when he doesn't have his own body, he tried to get his own body for about 13 years, and his frequency was such that a female human would spontaneously abort him every time. It just wasn't able to come to term. His frequency wasn't compatible enough. We're pretty galactic beings. So
Mhm.
his frequency wasn't compatible enough with a female human to be able to be carried. He just didn't find the right one. We'll say that. So he wasn't able to get a body. So we've been creative, um, borrowing bodies. And so he's groomed 12 bodies. One or two of them have already left the planet. These are bodies that have to have a certain level of consciousness, a certain age, a certain preparedness, and who want to who are kind of ready to go, and who are looking to make a deal, essentially. So he's worked out a deal. There are different deals with different people where if the timing has to be, there are a lot of things that have to be right. The timing, that person, like I met one of them, there was an option for him to come into. It was great body, um, great, great dynamic. And I saw I don't know. I was like, yes, let's do this. And he understood. He's like, yes, let's do this. And then it came down to when we were gonna like make that connection and do the process. And the guy called me at 4 a.m. He's like, wa-shay-la, I can't do this. We backed out and I haven't seen him again. That's okay. It has to be fully in. You have to be fully in to do this. Otherwise it's not going to work. And then there've been, some brushes with others that haven't quite worked out. There is a ceremony that happens that I understand now is the bringing in of the consciousness of the higher consciousness of the galactic. But that original, then there's a crossover for a while. And that's another type of walk-in, is the kind of walk-in where the original doesn't leave and they're sharing the body. So some of these situations are a full exchange, full soul exchange, and some of them are shared experiences where you have the walk-in and the original consciousness, and there's basically two consciousnesses sharing a body. That gets
Wow.
trippy too. So, these bodies are prepared, and the timing is at some point will or will not be aligned, and that'll happen again.
So were you in contact physically or by phone, let's say, with the last body that you were talking about? There was like, oh, never mind. Like, were you in contact with that person?
Mhm, mhm.
Was
Yes.
that local to you? I'm just curious. Uh,
Somewhat. Yeah, yeah. And there've
how,
actually been 2. I've had 2 of these experiences in the last few years.
how does that happen? Do you meditate and then you go and meet this person somehow in a supermarket? What happens?
It's very synchronistic. It's very clear. It's very precise. Um it's very obvious when it happens, like, oh, that's what's happening here. And it's kind of mind blowing. So you're like, oh my gosh, that's happening. And then all parties have to be on board. And what's happened both times is the original kind of backed out. And that's okay. Like when it's right, it's right. And when it's not, it's not. So everybody has to be 100% yes for this to work.
Consciousness level wise,
Uh-huh.
do those people in those bodies, do they embody a level of love, of joy, of peace, of enlightenment, or a certain level of enlightenment? Where are those
Yes.
enlightened beings only?
Well, you're talking about the physical person, the
Yes, the
person
physical.
that
Yes, the
yeah,
physical.
usually, I mean, okay, so there is a thing that happens. It can be a lot of different things, Yoni. It can be that the person's like spiritually adept and really just done. What like physicals can be very difficult. We all know that. It can be a struggle. And the person's just kind of like, okay, I've had it. I'm ready. I'm done. I want to go, but I don't want to cause harm to my body. It's a perfect scenario for that. If it's right, if it's right, if it aligns, usually in that situation, the person needs to have completed their karma. And if they have, and they've completed what they came here to do, and they're ready to go, it's a generous thing they can do, is to offer it to a higher consciousness galactic that wants to use the body. Sometimes it's someone who just hasn't been able to complete their mission and feels like, I'm done. I don't want this struggle anymore. I'm ready to go to a different place now. It can be that. It can also be someone who's reached a high level of consciousness, who's inviting, and this is what I've done, and kind of what we do in embodied ascension. You've reached a certain level of consciousness, and and you're ready to expand to more of yourself. So it can be a higher self walk in, where that person's like, okay, I've reached this level. Now I'm ready to embody more of me and step into my service work. So that can also be a type of walk in, and a type of walk in that works in this situation. And if you think of like my soul collective is huge. As humans, we don't just have one other side of our soul. We have this massive soul collective. As you expand out,
Mm.
and in the lineage of Sananda, it's a massive soul collective. So there's a lot of humans that could potentially be a good fit for that consciousness to walk in.
What is the lineage of Sananda?
It's a frequency collective, a very prominent collective on planet Earth at this time and for a long time. It's a Christ consciousness collective that is all about ascension and bringing ascension to humanity and assisting with humanity's rising up into higher dimensions of consciousness, which we're at the precipice of now. It's happening now.
When you say prominent, is this in numbers? Is this in just the level of what?
Well, okay, so there are a lot of layers to this as well, like anything. The best way I think to put it into words is it's like seeds. So a seeding, a collective. So there's we'll say the collective is Sananda. The Sananda collective has seeded its consciousness in humanity, in a large portion of humanity. Now, not all of the people that are seeded for that consciousness will have that wake up in them. But some will, many will. And so as we wake up to Christ consciousness, to higher consciousness, and to more of ourselves, that's like the lotus flowering and opening up to know more of itself. We awaken to that. And that is an awakening that we have. And then we're more consciously participating in as a collective of Sananda.
When you say prominent, seated in humanity, is this like 5% of humanity? Is this 20% of humanity? I'm curious if
This
there's
is
if there's a measure. I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but it's curious.
I see 25.
25.
25% of humanity has and okay, so this doesn't mean that 25% has woken up, but that seed exists in at least 25% of humanity.
Were you just channeling this information?
I just asked because I had no
Yeah.
idea. Yeah.
Wow, that's quick. It's pretty cool. Um, on the Christ consciousness term, does this have to do with Christianity? Does this have to do with Jesus?
Okay, so Jesus is of the lineage of Sananda. However, it's not about Jesus. That's a consciousness, right? It's a consciousness that people can tap into and actually get a beautiful brush in of what Christ consciousness is about. But you do not have to go through Jesus. It's not about Jesus. Jesus said that himself. Um, it is. It's a conscious I guess a frequency would be a way to say it. But Christ consciousness is the activation of it's the waking up, it's touching in and expanding into more of yourself and knowing that spiritual, that connection to the divine exists within us, within our heart center, within our bodies, within our energy field and our emotions and everything that we are when we allow ourselves to be informed by Christ consciousness, we awaken on so many levels. And so it's an opportunity to this is really the it's almost like a layer. I'm seeing it because visually I'm seeing it like a layer around the earth, a band of consciousness that we can expand into and be informed by as we awaken. And the more and more of humanity that do that, the more we ascend as the human collective and raise into that 5D experience of living on this reality.
Couple questions there. So first, in terms of 5D, we live in 3D. For that's, I think that most people can relate to that. What's 5D and what's in between then the 4D? How can you
Okay.
describe that?
So yeah, and I'm, we talk about dimensions. I use dimension more than density, but you can also think of it as there's a little different when you're talking about density, but 3D is what we think of. And this is not static, like you go 3, 4, 5. There is a whole range of like lower 3D, the middle, the upper, and like lots in between. So it's not just ABC. but
Mm.
with it, they're frequency bands. They are, if you've seen, there's this diagram of the harmonic universe, and there are these bands. It's like an egg, and these frequency bands around it. So as we move up in consciousness, and as our bodies, see, this is why embodied ascension, we also have to raise the frequency of our bodies, because if we don't, then we won't be able to move body and mind together. We'll have to leave the body. And that's what we don't want. We want to ascend with our bodies. So we move our bodies up with our minds, with our spirits. And then the 5D is a higher frequency of experience. So and we're going back and forth all the time. So when you're having experiences of synchronicity, of instant manifestation, of telepathy, of, like psychic abilities, these things are all more into the fifth dimensional reality experience. And the fourth is the in between. So there's like this non physical realm in between, which is, I've heard people call it time, the realm of time. I don't necessarily experience time as 4D, but almost like the non physical bandwidth that's between the third and the fifth physical bandwidths of frequency.
Wow.
Um, I'm not very scientific, so it's hard for me to put. If I was a scientist, I'd probably be able to put these into much better explanations. Phil Gruber has taught me some of these, some of this stuff. He's a great person. You can look him up. He's on Portal to Ascension a lot. So if you go to Portal to Ascension, Phil Gruber, I've interviewed him a couple times, and he has a wonderful way of explaining some of these things in much more, I guess, terms that would appeal more to someone with a scientific mind. I just understand that there are non-physical dimensions and physical dimensions. 3D is very physical. 5D, we lose some of our density as we move up. So our density, as we're getting lighter, we are enlightening, we are ascending our frequency, our density is getting lower. And so things feel, oh my gosh, amazing. 5D. There's simultaneously, there is more of everything. So there's more feeling, more color. We're picking up a larger bandwidth of being able to see color, of being able to hear more. We can experience things more frequency wise. We can feel things. If we want to read a book in the upper and fully in 5D, in the upper dimensions of 5D, we can just pick up like a book etherically and download it, like that USB experience. We just download the essence, the energy of it, the knowing, and it becomes the omniscience. We can understand anything that we tune our awareness into, and we're getting into the higher levels. This is as we go. So this isn't limited to 5D, but as we go up in these density levels, or in these dimensions, we are able to we become less physical, more energetic, and more able to interact with like instant telepathy, instant manifestation. If you think of something, you can create it right there. That's why I think they talk about, is it in The Secret or What the Bleep? One of those, a guy thinks of an elephant and it shows up right there. Well, that we don't want that in 3D. That just doesn't work, right? So it's good that we have that time lag here. But as you move up in dimension, you get this instant manifestation of your intentions. And you also get to practice honing your intentions and being mindful. And this is another reason to meditate and harness the ability to control your thoughts, so that when you are in these higher dimensions and things instantly manifest, your fears will instantly manifest like they do in dream time sometimes. You want to be ready for that. And you have to have an approach with a higher consciousness in order to be able to experience that in a transformational way.
A few things I want to mention. First of all, I will link to Phil Gruber on your show. So Waxela has an amazing podcast, The Alchemy of Ascension. If I'm not mistaken, you're in the sixth season right now.
Yep. I've done 6
Yeah,
seasons. 7th will come later this year.
yeah, amazing. So I'll link to those, and definitely check out our podcast if you're digging this conversation. You're going to learn a whole lot of things and experience definitely a lot more magic in your life just by listening and tuning in. Of course, if you join our embodied ascension, that's going to accelerate really quickly. Um, One more thing that I wanted to, it just slipped my mind for a second, talk about then. It will come back to me in just a second. Um, we were talking about 5D, the quickness of the, okay, so yeah, so the density. So as we're ascending to the fifth dimension, does that mean are we getting thin? Are we do we even have a physical body as the Earth is tuning into 5D? Are we just am I going to be flying very soon in 20 years? What's going to happen in your opinion, or do you already know?
Yeah. So I can tell you what I've experienced because, and here's the thing, you might be going back and forth. I'm sure that you are without even realizing it, or you might be realizing it. Generally, it's pretty clear to me where I'm at on any given day. Although I can also have moments of forgetting. But when I'm clearly in that space, I know because you feel so much more. It's amazing the feeling. So you do have a body, yes, and you will experience your body just as naturally as you do here. However, your body, as we move up, we upgrade, we become more crystalline in structure. We become higher up in frequency that we go, the more crystalline our bodies become. We have this crystalline blueprint with us, even here, even when we're in 3D. And as we move up, that activates, we become less carbon, more crystalline based, more light, right? So we're less dense, but we don't experience ourselves as feeling less because when you're there, that's normal, right? That's natural to you. Just like a light being who shows up to us and they just look like light, to that light being, they're not experiencing themselves as less in any way. They're actually
Mm,
experiencing more than we do. We're bound by this physicality.
mhm,
We are limited to our five senses and whatever extrasensory abilities we've brought on board. But as we move up, we'll say into 5D, more of our extrasensory abilities come online and we're able to interact with the world of the unseen in in many, many, many more ways. We're able to feel more. We're able to experience more, like a richer texture and quality of emotion. We're able to experience more depth of feeling and understanding. And like instead of us talking with words here, we can sit together and tune into each other's souls and experience the essence of each other's being and convey more of who we are and what we're about just by being rather than by saying words. And it doesn't mean that speech doesn't exist in 5D. It does, but there's more to experience. And then as you move into the higher realms, there's less and less need for vocalization, although there's still sound and beautiful sound and harmony, but there's less need to speak and it's more telepathic. That's why when sometimes I'm sure when you've had dreams and things, it's all telepathic. There are certain beings that I encounter, they don't speak. They only communicate telepathically because they don't, if they're from a higher dimension of reality, they don't need speech. They don't interact that way. It's limiting.
does that mean that when we dream or when one dreams that has the ability, they're in a higher dimension?
Sometimes, sometimes it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Another question there that came to mind. If I do use so would one spend more time, meaning their awareness would be more into 5D over time as this shift is happening, rather than 3D if they have the accessibility to that in terms of frequency? Does that is that what it means? 'Cause thinking that it's happening simultaneously in the third dimension, 5 dimension, but their awareness spends more time there, in that density?
I think that's a good way to say it. Yeah, as you ascend, your so think about it this way. Your consciousness is already there. Your consciousness already exists on all of the levels, right? On everywhere. Because when we're not bound by the physical, we are consciousness, which exists everywhere simultaneously. And so as you raise the frequency of your body, of your mind, of your emotions, and of your presence, of your way of being, you're naturally going to be raising into some of these higher dimensional experiences. And it's not like a line in the sand that you cross and you're like, okay, now I'm in 5D. It's this it's this gradual changing of experience. And you can be in a higher dimension. You can be existing and operating from a higher dimension and interacting with people in a lower dimension. That's possible too. So it's not that my experience of it is not that we go somewhere else, although it can feel like that sometimes too. But it's really that we're raising our frequency, we're experiencing higher dimensions of light, higher octaves of light, and interacting from that consciousness and still having the interactions with the other people in our lives that may or may not be having those experiences. But naturally, we'll have people gravitate to you that want that and that match that frequency. So we tend to naturally attract the tribe, the soul tribe that is like-minded. That's why that's like frequency. And also those that as service, because as you move up in frequency and in consciousness, your part of your service is to serve others who also desire that upgrade. And this might be in teaching, it might just be in being. And I know a lot of people as they move up want to be hermits, want to remove themselves from society because it doesn't feel compatible. And that's okay too. You can still offer your frequency from wherever you are because it's not bound by space and time.
Mhm. It's so beautiful, and it's beautiful to know that that's the way it is, and that it's okay. For one, the hermit, just knowing that their energy is emanating anyways, just by
Mhm.
being and inhabiting that body, perhaps in here on Earth. Was Earth tuned in to fifth the fifth dimension, fifth density before? Is this a new thing for Earth? Do you know?
Yeah. So again, consciousness exists on all levels at all times. Earth is going through that transformation herself. Like this is her time to ascend. And, maybe you've heard me say before, the earth is ascending with or without us. I'm here to help the humans ascend with the earth. That's my job, essentially. That's my service. So, the earth is going. I'm not here. I mean, I feel like all of us, all of the humans raising consciousness is beneficial to the earth, but my focus is to help the people. She did start out as we can think of as a three-dimensional consciousness. And her consciousness has been ascending for a very long time and is ascending now much more rapidly in the quickening as we have more light coming to our place in the universe. The earth's consciousness gets to ascend more rapidly, and that's what we call, this time the new age ascending, and the earth is going up in frequency.
What can one expect if they are resisting the ascension, even if they feel called to it? In terms of what's going to happen, perhaps as the Earth itself is ascending.
Mm. If you're resisting it, like that sounds like you actively know that it's happening but don't want to participate, or you're
Oh,
just not able to get there. Is that kind of what you mean?
or if somebody is not aware of it and is not going to ascend, what do you
Yeah.
expect that soul or frequency to experience as the frequency of
Yeah.
their surrounding is not matching anymore?
Okay, that's a great question because that is happening. It's happening all the time in every It's happening right now. Where there are people that, people are at all levels of consciousness here. There are some people that came in at a certain level of consciousness. They are not going to, it isn't even their soul path to move up at this time. They are where they are and they're going to have the experience they have and probably be completely oblivious to, everybody else. They're going to keep working out very third dimensional concepts. Um, Fear, anger, war, fighting, control, dominance, all of the things that come with lower experiences of consciousness. then there are some who will awaken to it and sort of want that and go for it. And it's an ongoing experience. I don't see it as a flipping of a switch. The whole world's going to the next, to 5D. And if you're not with us, you're going to crash and burn and be destroyed. Maybe it could happen that way. But the way I experience it is it's ongoing in every moment. Our consciousness is on the spectrum. It's going up, it's going down, it's going up, it's going down. It's everywhere in between. And the more conscious you become, the more time you're spending in those higher frequencies of light, and then the more you're moving up and you're creating those pathways to move up, the more you do that, the more you hold those higher frequencies. People that aren't waking up, that aren't, they're just not going to have that experience. I like to say it's kind of like we will be background people for them because we'll be not in their reality, and they will be background people for us, for people that are consciously doing the work. And that's not a judgment. That's just how it is. It's happening right. There are people that are of a higher frequency that we aren't, that are right here with us. We don't see them. I have seen them walk through my bedroom before.
Wow.
But they're, frequencies of light that we're not even picking each other up. We're too dense for them to see, and they're too light for us to see. So it's not a
Wow.
judgment. It's just where you are on that spectrum. You're going to see the people who are in your spectrum,
Wow.
right? You're going to see the colors that are in your spectrum.
So they can be in the same, let's say, physical local place on Earth. Let's say, even in the same room, but they're not even interacting with one another. They're just kind of passing one another unaware. Let's
Yeah.
say, or perhaps the higher frequency can sense that they're there, but the lower one may not have access to experiences. I'm sure there are beings around me all the time, and I'm not aware. I've experienced that, and it's something I want to touch on quickly if you have time, because I know we're getting into the time that we're setting here, and I've had experiences, and this is why I do my Men of Integrity retreats, and I co-created this community with my partner Michael Tierno. I've had great awakenings happening with plant medicine. That was my path. I was drawn to move to this country, the United States, from my homeland, from Israel, about 15 years ago. I, I consciously said that was because of egotistic things, and I think there was a good amount of that, of wanting to live a certain lifestyle, and also pursue Latina women in Miami, my wife. Just lower consciousness things. Also, I was looking for more freedom and less constriction, and that's something that I felt in my homeland. That in the reality that I was living in, at least, there was a lot of fighting, and it was required of me to join the army at 18 and sacrifice my life and all of the above. So I've had a bunch of experiences in plant medicine where I'm like, okay, I could tune in, I could see some of what I think was the crystalline blueprint, and I kind of feel like I'm in the matrix, and have the ability to download a lot of information very quickly, and it felt freaking amazing. Of course, I had some tough experiences in those. I do want to touch on something that I think is essential for people that are, let's say, light workers and are called to ascension. And I've seen that there's some fear or resistance with people that are vibing on a high frequency with plant medicine, and which I think of as technology. And I've seen kind of like a fear, and I think it comes from one, programming, and a bunch of that indoctrination that those are drugs, and especially the people are subjectively had bad trips and experiences that are very uncomfortable, and
Mhm.
also that there's no need for them. I think, yes, and as you mentioned, there is no need to use them, but they're here for a reason. I'm just thinking, for example, about mushrooms. They grow on the earth. Perhaps they connect a lot of the earth. And if I may, I know that you had some experiences, and I you know, I have not seen you in a fearful state before. You've experienced, let's say the alligator or the spider. What is your take on, and especially for somebody who's listening to this and is on a path to ascension and is resistance is like, no, I don't even want to touch this. I want to be pure. I don't, I'm not messing with those tools at all. Where I feel, and I've been having this conversation with a few people, that there's no need to fear. There's no need to poo or judge anybody who is doing that or those tools. if anything, I think it can accelerate for somebody, especially if they have a resistance to it. What is your take on those kind of technologies?
Mhm. So first of all, I want to say I agree with you in that it's not needed. I find them a calling. So, the saying, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. When the teacher's ready, the student will appear. They're teachers. The plant medicines are teachers, and they're powerful teachers. They have a lot to share, and it's not right for everyone. I agree with that. Not everyone is going to benefit from plant medicine. There needs to be a reverence and understanding of what you're partaking in, um, an intention, an understanding of going in with intention, setting space, sacred space, if you want to do it for consciousness reasons. Um, I'm not talking about recreationally using these as drugs, but as consciousness expansion tools. There's absolutely a place, and I've done many things throughout my years. I do come from a shamanic background where plant medicine is part of that, although it was never required. But what I found is the medicines that are right for me will show up and let me know at the right time, this is the time for you. And something will happen where the synchronicities, like how I ended up in Kauai, three powerful synchronicities at a time. When, I'd heard about 5-MeO DMT, that was also known as Bufo, the toad medicine. I had heard about that. People had told me about it, but I wasn't looking for it. I didn't like, I'm not going to go look for that. And then 3 times it started, coming in, knocking on my door. Synchronicities started happening. And I started contemplating, well, maybe this is calling to me. And there was a particular morning I was meditating out on my lanai a few years ago. And I asked the divine, I asked Bufo, which is the Colorado River toad. I asked the spirit, is this the right medicine for me at this time? Opened my eyes out of the meditation, a little toad hopped by. And that was a clear confirmation. It's like, yes, it's your time. So I chose to have that experience. And also it was so synchronistic the way, I don't need to get into it, but the way that came together. And so I've had 2 experiences with that medicine. Both times were just magically synchronistic the way that they happened. Both times I did with a shaman. I highly recommend don't do that medicine on your own. Have a shaman present that knows what they're doing and that can guide you, and both were life transformational experiences.
I would love to close this conversation with you either telling about one or both of these experiences.
Sure. Well, you can't really have one without the other.
Beautiful.
So,
Please.
yeah, because they were so intricately linked. I could talk for days about this experience. So I'm really going to give the very minimal version for respect of time. Um, the first one I experienced, it was with a really wonderful shaman who was very good at what he does and really set the sacred space up beautifully. Divine synchronistic connection with him. And I my intention was very simple, was to know God, to know my divinity, and to understand it more deeply. And also I was channeling Isis at the time. I'd had a lot of, and Isis, the goddess, I had a lot of interactions with her and her being, and she'd come through in a lot of ways. So, I also wanted to deepen my connection with her, with Isis. And so I went into that experience, and the first thing that happened was I write about this in The Love You Crave in my book, but I was embodied by Isis. It was not it was not channeling. This was I was her. Like I experienced with the seahorse. I was her. She came into me and then I was her. And I sat up and I started yelling as Isis. I had a staff and I was standing above where I could see the grid work. It was so large that I was standing in the grid work of the earth. The crystalline blueprint of the earth was in front of me. And I called my people and I put down my staff and I called and I said, the words that I said were, I am Isis. Hear my call. Lemuria, Andromeda. This is our world. And I express like it is time to take back our world, claim it. And as I'm yelling and I'm seeing my voice go across the earth, or across the grid work of the earth. And I see these people standing up with their swords, dressed as warriors and light bearers. And they're like, I could see who all of them that are with me. Let's take back our world. This is our world. We are reclaiming it. Claim it. And then I started yelling, birth it. And in birth it, it was like really, it takes our consciousness and our hearts and are coming together to birth this new world together. Birth it. And I was yelling, birth it over and over. I exploded. So as Isis, I exploded into Christ consciousness and became one with the divine, with God. And then I knew myself as God. I was God. There was no separation. And I was conscious that I am and all is one and that I was all of it. And it was such a powerful experience of oneness and and Isis was gone, everything was gone. It was just this consciousness of knowing itself, just being. And then I started to experience it as visual. And it's kind of like, when you see the eye of God or the eye of what's it called? I think it is the eye of God in the cosmos when they show that picture. It's kind of like that, but it was all blue for me, but I was it and like
Wow.
swirling around. It was really incredible. And then as the medicine wears off, thoughts started to come in. And so I started to have the thoughts, but what about my children? And suddenly I was conscious of having children. And then I would just see them in the swirl, like, oh, but it's all me. But what about my parents? Oh, it's all me. What about my friends? What about my work? Oh, it's all me. It's all part of this. And then as the medicine dropped away, I started to come back and I started to get really confused. So I was put in a chamber, one of those beautiful little holding chambers. I was met by a Pleiadian man. Um, and he put me in this periwinkle chamber to rest and integrate and then really come back. I went into a moment of confusion where I didn't know who I was because wa-shay-la was gone. There was no the ego's gone in that experience. There is no me or wa-shay-la. There's just I am, and there was no Isis. Like wait. I remember I was Isis. I remember I was somebody. I remember I am God. Who am I now? What am I? And there's this like confusion of the mind trying to grasp what it just experienced. So there was a time of just peaceful integration where I sat there with it and then was coming back to my body and starting to feel again. And so that ended that experience, but it didn't end the experience. It continued. And then it was a couple years later I found myself in a situation where it was actually the man that I said had the possibility of embodying my twin flame. It was a bufo ceremony where it would happen and where the integration would happen. And I set it all up, had a shaman come to the house. He was there. I was there. The shaman was there. And he's like, he backed out. He's like, I can't do this. But
Wow.
but but he let me do it. And so I'm like, well, I guess it's for me. I guess this is for me then. This is all for me to have this experience. So, and I hadn't done the dieta. I hadn't, like I didn't know I was going to be doing it. So, but it didn't matter. None of that mattered. So I said, and it was a beautiful woman, shaman this time, but I asked her, she asked me, what is your intention? And I said, I want to experience more. I want to expand and experience more than I ever have before. Be careful what you ask for because this one was completely different, but it's like then I rocketed beyond my consciousness. It's not like rocketed out of body because body just, you forget that you have a body. You forget that you have, I wasn't wa-shay-la, but my consciousness expanded immediately, just blew right through the realm of God that I had experienced previously, way past that, just right through it. And I hadn't really contemplated that happening before. And then very, very, very rapidly, I experienced all of creation from first moment of creation. This is not just my creation, this is all of creation. From first moment of creation to the complete climax or completion of creation, which culminated in nothingness, total black nothingness, complete. I mean, you can't explain it because there's nothing, a complete nothingness. And without consciousness, my consciousness left then. There was nothing left for me to experience. And fortunately, I had the shaman because I don't know, how that would have happened, what I would have done without her. But she had a koshi chime and she played that koshi chime at that moment. And some part of my consciousness was able to find that sound, pick up that sound and like kind of grab it and follow it. And so I followed that sound back into my body, but I didn't just come back into my body. I went back through in reverse order, all of creation from completion to beginning, and then landed, like dropped into my body. And I was between dimensions at that point. That all happened so rapidly in 10 minutes, she said, or 15 minutes. That all happened. And I was back in my body and my eyes were open, but I was also still in other dimensions. So I was seeing her high self. Oh my gosh. And just the beauty, everything in the room was so full of life and color and vibrance. And I mean, it was just so beautiful. I couldn't see myself. I wasn't even aware really of myself, but I wasn't at the same time. All of my guides were there with me. I came back with new guides and I could see them and feel them. And it was just such an amazing, incredible experience. But then my body had to integrate that. And that was difficult. And I went through a lot of convulsions and and then my mind trying to grasp everything that I had just experienced was a lot for my mind to hold. So there, it was the experience itself was 45 minutes or so, but it was a year and a half it took me to integrate that second experience. And same probably took me about the same with the first one, but it was much more pleasant with just going to God. That was lovely. Going, way beyond that as I did took a lot more. And so there was an integration. I woke up that night, it was full moon, and that's when the moon beckoned, told me to come outside, and I laid outside under the moonlight, and I started just heaving and sobbing and crying and releasing all of this grief and clearing all of this grief. And I understood this is the grief of being human, of being embodied, of being captured in this container, like you can think of it like a firefly being caught in a jar, but knowing that all of that is out there, but it's stuck in this jar. It's felt like the grief of and the terror even of becoming human from a soul perspective, grieving that for hours and then like finally being over that. And then I was afraid to sleep for a long time because I would go back to that point of nothingness and I didn't know if I'd be able to come back. And I had to integrate that fear. What if I don't? Like get clear, get surrender to, okay, if it's my time, then I won't. And if it's not my time, then I'll stay. And that took a lot for me to come to terms with. All of that took a lot to come to terms with. Integrating all of that was a lot. And that's why I think people need to be very, very careful about how they go into this and what your intention is. I got what I asked for both times very clearly. I think set up your intention and your mind to be able to handle what you're going to receive and treat it as sacred and have a shaman, someone sit with you who will mind you and help you through the process. It's a rebirth. Absolutely.
Wow. I mean, absolutely wow. That is just, wow. I mean, these are quite the experiences. Have you been, have you experienced the nothingness since that experience?
Oh yeah. Well, not to the point where I was completely lost in it. Well, I can experience the nothingness very easily now. However, there is an element of my consciousness that exists with it simultaneously. So I can go there without feeling like I'm going to completely be lost, which is what I need. I needed to get that level of control. Um, in order to manage my experiences. Otherwise, I felt like I'll just not come back. So once
Wow.
I can, if I can maintain some little minute piece of consciousness in that space, then I feel safe to go.
Wow. Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Well, Shayla, I have so many more questions, and I'm going to leave them for a follow-up podcast because we're coming on the 2-hour mark here. And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing for humanity and beyond, and for being my teacher and a friend, and for sharing all these stories and all this wisdom. I highly, highly recommend to anybody listening your podcast and your training and anything in relation to the energy that you embody and share and this love with us here.
Mm.
So thank you so much for all of that. Uh, yeah, I'm forever grateful and
Thank you.
joyful.
Could I just say thank you so much too for all you bring and all the light that you are and your wonderful men's retreats. And, every time I get to interact with you, online is great, but in person, you are such a stand up person and you just are such a bright light and you bring so much and serve in such a high way. I truly appreciate you. I appreciate this podcast and having me on. And I really want to offer so much gratitude for who you are and what you do in the world. Thank you, Yoni.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, Shayla, thank you everybody for listening. A big aho and namaste. Take care. Much love and blessings. Well, lovely beings, I hope you enjoyed and were inspired by this conversation as much as I was. You can find the full show notes and all episodes on my website at yonihavana.com/podcast. If you are a man and you are called to do transformational work to become a better man, to find and grow the divinity within you, and you are longing a community of masculine men who share a passion for growth, please check out Men of Integrity by going to moi.community. Lastly, if you are enjoying the Yoni Havana podcast, I'd be so grateful if you take a moment to leave us a rating and a review on your podcast app of choice. The Yoni Havana podcast is a brand new show, and your support would help reach new people by rating higher on the algorithms. Also, your feedback would help me deliver the best experience to you as the show keeps evolving. Much love and a big aho. See you on the next one.